Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Another day, another step closer to depopulation of the West. By their own stupidity, of course. My apologies if I sound stuffed. I am. We wound up downwind from somebody clearing a field, burning it. Well, I mean, they're doing the control burns, but man, all that ragweed and everything burning, and it just, last day and a half has just been hell. So there's that. And this is another Drago Dog Walk Talks. We'll see Drago in a minute as we make our way down. And Drago's doing Drago things. So anyways, can't have a day go by without having a new NATO panic to drive war into the heads of the meat that's going to have to go fight and die for their owners. I'm not going to mince words. I'm going to say it as it is. I always do. So now the latest thing in this panic is Russian planes have flown over Estonian and Lithuanian airspace. Okay, let's break that down first of all. This Estonian and Lithuanian airspace deal. What they actually flew over was the exclusive economic zones of Estonia and Lithuania, and that on the edge. So what is an exclusive economic zone? That is a zone that is not the territory, the government territory of that nation. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's an exclusive economic zone. You can transition it because it's neutral waters, basically. It's outside the actual airspace of any one nation that they have a right to close. Now, if those Russian jets that were en route to Kaliningrad were to stop over these zones, hover there, and the pilots were to get out on the wing, and start fishing, yes, and at that point, Estonia and Lithuania would have grounds to be very, very pissed off, because that would be taking economic profit from their exclusive economic zone. But transitioning exclusive economic zone is neutral waters. They have no right to stop it unless they want war. I mean, it's that simple, but they do want war. The thing is they just can't start the war right off the bat. They need to convince the sheep that are going to be dying in mass that they're doing this for a righteous cause. Luckily for them, most of the Europeans are now just so dumbed down and so ignorant of reality, they have no idea what the hell an exclusive economic zone is. And they're biting into this panic. Oh, the Russians are right there. And then you get, but the end of it is, they're all betting everything on not just starting a war, but that by starting a war, they'll get the Americans to come in there and die in mass. Because their backstop at the very minimum is to close the airspace over Ukraine, which means direct confrontation between a NATO Air Force and Russian Air Force and Russian anti-aircraft missiles, which, well, to say that they outrank the Europeans, it's like saying a guy with a baseball bat is a threat to a guy with a submachine gun who's standing 20 meters away from him. No. The NATO may have more planes than Russia combined. But then again, those are very different types of planes. When they do these combinations of, look, how many tanks versus Russian tanks or something like that, they count them all as the same. The Leopard 1, which is basically a T-55, driving out into the battlefield is going to die very, very quickly. Thin armor, low-powered main gun compared to modern warfare. Leopard 2, as we've seen, dies pretty damn quick, too. So that's, but it has more survivability than Leopard 1, just as an example. Oh, just your dumb. He wants a treat. Here you go. So anyways, so there's that moment. Yeah. Allergies are a bitch. So they want the American backstop as aviation. Of course, what they really want is the 18th Airborne Corps go in there and die in mass because light infantry against heavy Russian forces. You know, okay, so the entire 18th Airborne Corps goes in. So you get about 50,000 soldiers. That's not all combat soldiers. That's 50,000 total. In a battlefield where each side has close to 1 million. Ain't gonna make a huge difference, especially light infantry. So, but that's what they want, because one way or the other, they want to draw. Здрасте. Драго, давай. Пошли, пошли. One way or the other, they want to draw the U.S. into this war, into this conflict. And this is what they think, that if the fighting really starts, Trump's not going to have a choice but to send the U.S. Army in. They're getting in for an ugly surprise, because that's actually exactly what Trump wants them to do, is to start this war going. He's not going to go into it. He's going to sell them weapons under a neutral flag. He's going to absolutely ignore Article 5, which again, Article 5 doesn't mean the U.S. Army goes charging in. Article 5 means everybody gets to decide how they're going to help. You know, Trump will help by selling them weapons on credit or what have you, and declaring neutrality. And then the Turks aren't going to go charging in either. Never mind, the Turks have a very bad history of fighting Russia. 11 lost wars out of 13. So, not exactly the best betting average. But they have absolutely no economic or financial or territorial interest in doing this. They've got nothing to win from it. They've got a lot to win from when the Europeans are going to be crushed economically. Turkey actually has quite a bit to win off that, including its own backyard. But then you go, the Europeans will be forced to go fight, and the European Union has no choice, the leadership. One, as we all know, financially Europe is done. The European USSR is economically a basket case at best. Financially, it has been robbed to the core. Its industry is massively deindustrialized, but they can still buy weapons on credit from the Americans and keep their little war going, which won't stay little very long. Then you get this big fat slug turd. И вот Драго для вас всех. Драго. Ну и вот, было. Пошли, пошли. Да пошли. Пошли, пошли, пошли. Anyways, so you get this fat slug. No. You got a treat. So you get this fat slug turd called Boris Johnson, who is an incredible specimen of humanity. Born in New York, former British Prime Minister, is swimming in blood because he started this war more than anybody else. Or at least he played the role for Biden. He's making millions off of it. So he tells another pocket monkey journalist, if you want to call him that, another EU pocket monkey, about how the Russians, first of all, Russians have put up all these red lines, like the tanks and the blah, blah, blah. Actually, no, Russia actually didn't put any of those red lines on. The US did, or NATO did. And then crossed their own red lines and made it look like, how we're heroes. No, everything that they sent has been killed. 1.8 million Ukrainians and NATO troops are dead. Dead and gone. That's right. Lots and lots of NATO officers have been destroyed. And will continue to be destroyed. Russia is now actively hunting down NATO headquarter units that are in Ukraine. Something they don't particularly want to talk about. But that's how it is. Пошли. Пошли. Драго, пошли. So, I said, that's not something NATO particularly wants to admit, or talk about, but that is what's happening. So he tells the pocket monkey that, look, it doesn't matter what the Russians say or want. We just need to send the troops in. Yeah, well, they won't be fighting. They'll be doing rear area ash and trash type of stuff. Logistics and all. The Ukrainians will be the fighting. And the Russians won't dare touch us. It don't matter what the Russians say. We don't need to listen to them. They'll do whatever we tell them. Now, either the man is absolutely delusional because his own fat arse. Oh, God, the photos that came out with him on a beach. I mean, it's just... good Lord, that was disgusting to look at. And I talk about a person who just lets himself go. He looked like a meth head on the beach. And maybe he is, because he's delusional enough to be a drug addict. I don't know if he is or not, but he acts that way. And then, the Russians wouldn't dare. They wouldn't dare. Yeah, ask the thousands of dead NATO troops, including son of a French general. Another French general just happened to go walking off in the mountains, fall off a cliff in the middle of the night. Whatever excuse they use to justify why their officers keep getting killed. The dead Brits, the dead Americans that have gone into Ukraine. Ask all of their families. Oh, that's right. They get paid off to shut the hell up about how that goes. But then you can, I guess, write it all off when you have mass casualties, like, say, if the French go in force, they can write off all the hundreds of dead Frenchmen, whether they're from the Legion or from the rest of the French forces, off under the heap of dead bodies that will be coming back anyways. But the Europeans, as a sheep herd, will be moved along quite quickly into the proper mental mode of going and dying for your elites. Well, Western Germans were actually denazified, and they've remained denazified, and they're pro-Russian for the most part, as you can see in the voting records of the AfD, which wins overwhelmingly in Eastern Germany. Western Germany, on the other hand, are the type of people like Schulz that went round, I guess this is round 3 or 4 now, however many rounds you want to count since the first invasion by Germans as allies of the monarchy of Poland into Russian lands was in 1012 AD. That's right, over 1,000 years ago. Hasn't stopped, and they don't keep learning, no matter how many times they get beaten. I don't know, genetics maybe. But for the Germans, just think of it this way: once the fighting starts, you think you've had bad winters so far? What do you think is going to happen to your gas storage, underground gas storage facilities? We've already seen that the Oreshnik can burn through multiple floors worth of concrete. What do you think is going to happen to your gas storage? I wouldn't live within, about 10, 12 kilometers of one of these major gas storage facilities when the fighting really starts. Because they're going to get one hell of a boom when that Oreshnik burns through and detonates the gigantic gas storage facilities underground. Talk about earth-shattering explosions. Germany's going to feel that one. So is Denmark up north. And then guess what happens? Winter gets real cold. It doesn't have to be super cold outside to have a really crap winter if you can't heat your houses. The German government has made sure that most people no longer have any kind of stoves. They've put massive taxes on wood-burning stoves or coal-burning stoves. None of the new houses have them. They're banned for the most part. So, and then try living in an apartment block with a stove. You can't put it in there. It's all centralized heating. Well, if there's no heating because there's no electricity because there's no gas. Right. Yeah, by the way, that's my new t-shirt. The Rebel South. I like it. So, yeah. What are you going to do? You're going to freeze to death. That's what you're going to do. I explain things to Finns all the time to think, they're going to have a glorious replay of the Winter War, and they're all going to be sniper superheroes killing Russians in the millions because, that's the stories they get told, and that's the videos that they see in the movies. There I go. Well, the reality of what's going to happen in a lot of these, well, the combat is going on the front lines. Oh, Finland will just close the border, just exterminate anything that comes across that border, and then take out the infrastructure in Helsinki. You know, the gas facilities, the electricity generation, port systems, the sanitation, and so on. All the things that make life in a major city habitable. Without that, winter and cold, the colder winter, hunger, they'll thin the herd quite a bit. The same thing's going to happen for the rest of Northern Europe. Because all of that northern infrastructure that makes massive cities possible in general, especially in winter, is going to be destroyed. Nobody's going to charge into those cities. We don't need to charge into cities. We can just starve them out by long distance. You know, what's going to happen when 1 million, 2 million refugees are fleeing Berlin into the countryside? That's right, they're going to be like locusts. And they're going to eat everything clean. We're talking massive, massive issues and catastrophe that the Europeans are not prepared for. They don't have the reserves for. They don't have anything on that, even close to the order of what they need. Or even thought probably about something like that. Well, think about it, you know, gas is done. You need, people are literally starving and freezing in a city. The average city has 3-4 days worth of food in it. The average apartment, and that's counting warehouses to feed the entire population. Your average family living in a major city, a modern family, has 1 day's worth of food, for the most part. And then when you have no electricity, believe me, everything above a 5th story is pointless. Because try lugging water and everything up that far. If it's winter, you gotta heat that water somehow. You know, places like Italy or Spain, you know, when everything goes out, they're much more livable because they're not that cold, or not cold at all, depending where you're at. But places like Germany, northern France, and Belgium, Denmark, the Scandinavian lands, you know, even winter comes. True, Finland, most of them, they don't live in actually the mountainous areas. They live on the shores. It doesn't get quite that cold, but it still makes life very, very difficult when you have no electricity. Because that's what we're going to go after. Those Oreshniks are going to take out. First of all, I would definitely not want to be in NATO headquarters when the big balloon goes up, because that's going to be an Oreshnik target from hell. I mean, that's just obvious. Second of all, is going to be this kind of infrastructure. So again, it comes down to, do you people actually realize what you're being pulled into? But yeah, so, but you know, these turds, I don't know what else to describe them as, these subhumans, because they consider themselves to be uber-humans, like Johnson, like most of the EU's leadership. They're not worried. That's the problem with it too, is they're not worried. They think they're going to get away with this. They'll be in their bunkers, or they'll be safe, and the little people will get decimated is the best case. Annihilated is more like it. And I think, you know, privately, they should all be told, when this starts, we're going to go after you and your families, and your housing, and the people closest to you. So you know you're going to be part of all this. You're not going to get away with this scot-free. We'll find the bunkers, we'll Oreshnik your bunkers if we need to. One way or the other, you're not coming out of this alive. That may actually put at least a little break on it. When they actually, well, maybe. I don't know how much rationality is left in these people, actually, in all actuality. Giving up slight hope on rationality from these people. They actually believe their own bullshit. It is extremely, extremely dangerous when politicians start to believe their own propaganda, their own crap that they feed the public. When they become true believers of their own crap, you have serious issues. And here's another little interesting note. You know, most of you know I'm a monarchist. I'm a constitutional monarchist, but I am a monarchist. And monarchy as a government, where there's actual monarchy, not the figurehead monarchies that we have in most of Western Europe, but actual ruling monarchy. Interesting little facts about it is, as a government/economic institution, they're much cheaper and much more peaceful. And here, there was an interesting economic video I was watching from an economic historian, and he was breaking it down by actual data as it exists. And the interesting thing is, the more democratic a system becomes, the more expensive that system becomes. The average, and this is going to be a shock for most Europeans, but the average tax load, the realistic historical average tax load in the 1800s, 1600s on the peasantry and the middle class was only about 10%. 10%. Half of that went to supporting an army and half of that went to supporting the government. Now, I mean, think about it, 10%. You know, I think Finland is the highest right now, like 65% income tax. 65%. And then a VAT on top of that, that's like another 20-something percent. But they give you a small present back, like when your kids go to first grade, they'll give them a laptop. So we'll take away most everything you earn and we'll give a little tidbit back to you to make you feel like you're getting something out of this deal. But yes, 10%. And as the systems became more liberalized and more people became enfranchised to vote, the government, of course, starts to balloon. Each politician decides that he's a little mini king, and once the head of the government is the prime minister or a president, well, you know, they need to keep themselves reelected and their party reelected, and they do that by making lots of additional promises that a king would need to do. And the only way to fulfill those promises, the only way to fulfill those promises is to tax and tax and tax, which sooner or later you get to the point where it's just a crippling tax level that stunts economic growth, massive amounts of bureaucracy that makes manufacturing or any economic activity legal economic activity, not in a gray zone, all but impossible, and you get an economic crash. That's how all republics die. All republics die, and there's not a single republic that survived more than about 200, 250 years at the most. Even though Rome called itself a republic for quite a while and still had the facade of a republic, it wasn't a republic. It was imperial rule after Caesar. Что ты сел, блин? Drago. We've had people poisoning dogs, throwing stuff out, and he just put something in his mouth. I didn't notice. Foo. So anyways, so that becomes a big problem. You know, just if you look at the U.S. as just an example, the U.S. supposedly rebelled against the tea tax. So okay, get this, the average American taxpayer. Your ancestors, if they were in America at that point, rebelled against a 10% tax on tea. That was it. That's the only tax they paid. It was a 10% tax on tea that helped finance the army that was defending the borders of the 13 colonies. Now, having said that, he dropped whatever he was chewing on. Some napkin, a greasy napkin that it found in the bush. Gotta watch them. We're worse than little kids. The U.S. government, of course, taxed the crap out of everything. They went toward taxation real quick. That's where you get things like the Whiskey Rebellion, when they started taxing whiskey. And why that was important, because the farmers in the outlying areas with no roads or paths, they couldn't get their corn to market fast enough before it rotted. But they made whiskey, and then they could sell whiskey all through winter to pay fall and winter, because corn whiskey was always in demand. And they could finance their farms that way, and the loans that they had to pay on those farms. That's another thing that they don't tell you about. A lot of those militia, there were a lot of them who were called up against their will. They went to fight. They all had credits that they had to pay back on their farms to the King's banks in places like Virginia. Well, those banks just became the American banking system after the U.S. got independence. And guess what? They come back after serving years in the colonial army or in the militia, and find out that their families have been displaced and they're out of a farm because out of the house because they couldn't pay their mortgages. They couldn't pay their mortgages because they were serving. But, you know, so what? Not our problem. Thanks for serving, you can pay the mortgage. Bye-bye. And that was from day one in the U.S. There was actually a point where U.S. Congress banned a genre of songs that living under the king was better than living under the republic. And it was much more expensive to live under a republic. So that's why they sell you this whole thing that you're actually empowered under a republic, unlike under, say, a king who's born to his title, because you could become king too. You could become king too, well, in the form of a president or a prime minister. Of course you can't, because if we look at it realistically, it's all run from very rich clans. There was an interesting thing. This girl, back under Obama, did a study of all the American presidents. I think it's 43 of them at that point. Down, not to the 1600s, but she did the family tree down to the 1200s. You can look this up, particularly in the British press. A lot of the American articles have disappeared out of the archives, but in the British press, there's a lot of it. She got a grant to university for it. But the interesting thing that she found was all but, at that point, one American president were all relatives. And yes, Obama was one of them, who was a relative. The only non-related going down to the 1300s, at least, a lot of them a lot closer than that, the only non-related president was Kennedy, an Irishman. The rest were all related to each other. And interestingly enough, all the American presidents had the same root. King John Prescott. Remember Robin Hood? Well, Robin Hood's a fake figure, but John Prescott wasn't. He's the guy that signed the Magna Carta after losing a war to his barons. That's when Richard Lionhearted was sitting in a dungeon in Austria. He was coming back from the Crusades, and he was and his younger brother John Prescott was trying to buy him out. Well, he was trying to get a lot of money. He wasn't going to buy his brother's freedom with it. That's a whole different issue, because he wasn't going to give up the throne. Well, his barons rebelled, at least some of them, and he lost the first civil war, signed the Magna Carta, and then hired a bunch of pagan mercenaries out of Denmark and started a second civil war where he drowned in a river crossing with his gold. At least that's how legend goes on that. Can't say for sure, but that's how history goes. So they're all related. You know, somebody like Vance, who may actually become president, they have to bring at least one guy in that's not from a rich family. And the Kennedys, who were not related, well, Trump's the other one that's not related to this big clan. Though Trump's now related directly to big Israeli money. So yeah, Kennedy and Trump are the only ones that weren't directly related to the others. In fact, the Bushes and the Clintons, they're all minor aristocracy from the edges of London, from some towns in London that had been marrying each other since the 1600s. Go look it up. I actually did look all this up. I wrote an article on this. So it's very interesting, the deeper you go, how related all these people really are to each other. Well, they may have to bring in Vance to keep the view that any boy can grow up to be president of America. He doesn't have to come from an extremely rich family. Here, look, you know, Hillbilly became a rich guy. Never mind, Vance is tied to big finance through his career. But at least he came up from humble roots, if you can say that. And you can't say that for the vast majority of the other presidents, or any of them, really. They were all from very well-off families. Taking turns, basically. Basically, you're ruled by a clan, an oligarchical clan. And the U.S. has been like that since day one. It's been a good masquerade as a republic, but really the power remains in a very defined class of people who all happen to be relatives. I mean, just as an example, Obama is, third cousin or second cousin to Dick Cheney? Yeah, there you go. Yep. There you go. And the more you start digging into it, the more you find out that, yeah, there's a good illusion and BS that's sold to little kids and foreigners. But the reality has very little to do with the illusion. But they got to keep the illusion going somehow, even though it's collapsing. Interesting enough, too, is the videos have started coming out on YouTube about people suddenly realizing that tariffs are you. It's not good at manufacturing. It's not the manufacturing centers that pay the tariffs that Trump is lumping on everybody. It's the consumer. There's a perfect video of a family. They bought some equipment from Canada from their for their business, and then they got a FedEx bill for the tariffs that FedEx had to pay on that equipment. It's like another $300. So, you know, probably on about a $600 piece of equipment or so. So, what's the tariff rate for Canada these days? Like 40% or something like that. So yeah, so there you go. That $100 billion or whatever Trump has collected. Honestly, I don't even know if Trump understands how tariffs work. I think Bassett would have to understand, but then again, I'm not so sure Bassett even fully understands economics. They talk a good game using big words that most people don't understand, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty, these people aren't bright. Now, people making the money off of all this are bright, the people behind them, but not these people particularly. So, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if Trump understands how tariffs work. I mean, he may believe the bullshit that he's spewing, but the people getting the bills, they damn well understand how tariffs work. They really, really understand how tariffs work. The tariffs may deter procurement, or at least procurement choices, depending if there's alternatives. Cheaper alternatives that are made in that country that's tariffing everybody, or made by some other country that isn't being tariffed. But when everybody's being tariffed, you know, there's only so far you can go, A. And B, here's the biggie on this, most everything that's made in America still uses at least some sub-assemblies and parts that's imported. So you're never going to get away from these tariffs. Either way, everything's going up in price. Oh, and by the way, add to the uranium, the fertilizer, and oil, heavy oil that the U.S. buys from Russia. Latest news that came out on imports into the U.S. from Russia. As of July, the U.S. is now buying chicken eggs from Russia. In July, I bought $500,000 worth of chicken eggs. Sure, it's not a gigantic amount, but it's a starting amount. So you gotta wonder, the U.S., which is supposed to have this massive agricultural sector, has to import eggs from the other side of the world, A, and B, from the country that it declares as its #1 enemy. Threat assessment. Even if the politician may not say directly it's the #1 enemy, the yearly threat assessment puts Russia right there. Or sometimes it's #3 after China and global warming or some other moronic crap like that. So yes, the U.S. now imports chicken eggs from Russia. Incredible, isn't it? That's where we're going. So I guess it'll be Russia exporting Bush's wings or Bush's legs. That's what the chicken wings that were imported into Russia during the 90s were called. They're imported from the U.S. Guess Russia will be returning the favor to America soon and exporting chicken to the U.S. Yeah. Life's interesting, isn't it? It just keeps getting more interesting. All right, enough of my babbling. God bless. See you next time. And please support this channel. If you can support financially, thank you very much. If you can't, share, like, and comment. Comments are always welcome. I try to read most of them. Don't always make it through the whole list. Sometimes there's a lot of comments. I'm just busy. But I definitely try to at least read as many as I can and answer a lot of them. So anyways, God bless. Cheers.